joining us in our last presentation of the day and bearing with us through all of the changes to the agenda. Much appreciated. We had somebody with a family emergency. So once again, a couple brief announcements. If you could hang out after this session and help us clean up, that would be greatly appreciated. If you want to take food, food is available. The rest will be donated to a local food pantry. We still have Gleaning census reports for sale for the symposium price of $20. There's a QR code. It takes you to our donation page. And then the voting is underway for the board members. The ballot has gone out to the designated voter for your organization, if your organization has a current membership. So if you don't know if your organization is currently a member or don't know who the voter is, you can check with me after this session. But I want to get started, and what we have in front of you is what I call the OG panel, Original Gleaners. And I sent a note to these folks saying, you know, we'd be honored if you would join us in the OG panel. And then I felt like I needed to be a little pedantic and say why OG, because you know it's a terminology that has kind of come out of gang culture, right? Original gangster. And I thought it would be fitting for this group. And then my daughter reminded me that that may be a little bit of cultural appropriation and inappropriate, but too late, cat's out of the bag. So this is our OG, Original Gleaners group. And so I'm going to ask that, starting with Betsy, that they introduce themselves, and then I've got some questions, and we're going to keep it conversational. So go ahead, let's start with you, Betsy. Quick introduction, and then pass the mic.
Hi everyone, my name is Betsy Storm, and I'm Senior Manager of Volunteer and Mentorship Programs at Food Forward, and we are located in Los Angeles, and we work across LA County, Ventura County, which is just north, and Santa Barbara County, which is just north of that. And we recover produce in a couple of different ways. We do some backyard harvesting, anything from like a tree in someone's front or backyard to a commercial orchard. We do farmers market recovery, and then we recover on the wholesale level at the LA Produce District. So we've been around since 2009.
Allison, Levin of Community Harvest of Central Vermont. We are in a central part of Vermont, which is between New York and New Hampshire, up in New England, far away from here. I'm the founding executive director and also run the Gleaning and Food Recovery program. We do primarily direct from food producers, whether that's picking up from farms, gleaning from fields, some direct individuals or homeowners as well, and market gleaning, recovering year-round surplus in Vermont, and working with lots of volunteers to do that.
Hi, I'm Barbara Eiswerth with Ishkashika Refugee Network from Southern Arizona. We glean from backyards, orchards, small farms, educational gardens, somewhere between 70 and 100,000 pounds each year. We started out as all volunteer, and now we're 5 strong full-time employees after developing leadership among AmeriCorps and YAF for a couple decades. And I think that's all I have to say. Interested in sharing.
So excited to have you all here. So let's start with the first question. And I'm going to direct this to Betsy, and then all of you will have a chance to add or chime in. If one of you doesn't feel like you want to answer a question, just say pass and we'll move on to the next. So let's get started. Betsy, if you were to start a gleaning program from scratch today, what would you do differently?
I'm gonna ask.
I'd be happy to.
Go ahead.
Because I've made every mistake there is to make. So, and just even sitting here, I was like, oh, I didn't even think about the money. Never asked for money. Never asked for donations. We started out as all volunteer, and I think that's a good way to start. But the thing that I didn't think of was that I was going to do this year after year after year after year after year year, I won't go through 23 of those. But because of that, and technology has changed dramatically. We started out using GPS units that were this big and GIS and imagery, satellite imagery to do our fruit mapping. We never considered the privacy of that data and how good the data would be 10 years later, where you can see if somebody's in the pool or how many cars are in the parking lot. So taking those under consideration when you're mapping and disclosing that information, particularly if you're with private homeowners. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I guess the thing that I was thinking about in that, and one sort of a challenge that we're sort of working on now that I sort of wish we had done more earlier on, was doing a little bit more. We did a lot of structures and systems for the program, but not as much for the leadership or the board, and didn't have as high expectations for them as we might have liked. I don't know if that's realistic or not, but it feels like maybe if we had that bar a little bit higher earlier on, it might have made the current challenges a little bit different.
Thanks, ladies. Let's go on to another question. We've talked a lot about this distribution being one of the biggest challenges. Allison presented on that, and I know that all of you have robust distribution systems. So let's start again with you, Betsy. How do you handle the logistics of distribution so you get food out quickly and equitably?
We distribute in a few different ways, but as much as possible, and when it's feasible for the agency, they come pick up. So our farmers market recovery program, all of our agencies meet us directly at the market at the end of the glean, and our volunteers just help load up the boxes into their car. So that's really helpful. It's also really helpful when volunteers don't necessarily have the space in their cars, or especially in SoCal, and we don't know how much we're going to get at a glean. It could be 20 boxes or it could be 100, depending on the season. And so having agencies that often already have their volunteer drivers, or they've got a box truck or some kind of larger vehicle, it's really helpful for us to be able to just glean everything that we can, and then we know that it's gonna go somewhere else.
Yeah, let me think about that for a second. So I think, and this had to do with our aggregation model, we are bringing all of our food back to our storage and really being very purposeful about making that available to all of our sites, so a very different model than Betsy is using. And certainly the quality of that and making sure it's fresh is a key component in how we're deciding when to schedule our gleans, what the duration. Occasionally we do just distribute things directly when we have fresh fruit or blueberries or something that we know ours not going to keep, and we can't glean it on a day right before our distribution date. So there's sometimes when we do have to adjust our system to account for that, the shelf life of the product. But in general, a lot of especially the freshly gleaned things have a pretty good shelf life and are in good quality. So that helps a lot with that distribution and makes it easier.
Just one little tidbit to add to that is when diverting prior to, we also come back to a central location, but in years past we have diverted, and because we didn't want it to go to waste, because it was easier on the homeowners to deliver to a food bank instead of us, we didn't take into consideration how that would lower our numbers. We wouldn't capture or get credit for those numbers of educating the public, encouraging the public. So I would do that differently today.
Okay, thank you. Kind of keeping on the key components of gleaning, so we talked about distribution, and we'll start with you, Allison. What does an effective volunteer program look like in practice, all the way from recruitment to retention? How do you grapple with those issues?
We don't have 2 hours. There's a lot of pieces in that. I think one of the first things that comes to mind is just that general education about what Gleaning is in your community and being visible. And so that's one of the key pieces right now in our region. We're just sort of doing our yearly engagement of volunteers, sort of everyone's getting excited about spring, so getting them excited about coming out and distributing our posters. And so that's, and along with other strategies, but old-fashioned posters with tear-offs, add a QR code, but that's been really beneficial just to be really visible. So right now we're trying to be visible in many different ways in the community, sharing signs with our partners so that when people are shopping at the farmer's market or other producers, they can see that those partners are working with us. And when people see that like something cool is happening and they're not involved, that's a good opportunity for them to see where they can contribute and get involved in that way. And then I think the other key pieces is personal relationships with those volunteers and making them feel like they are, maybe not the only one who's involved in that, but their participation is key to that activity, and not like, oh, there's 100 million of you, you're getting this generic response, but really trying to customize that and make them feel like it is pretty small and intimate in terms of our projects and activities. We still work with 200 to 400 volunteers a year, so making them feel like that they're not one of 400, but they're one of regular volunteers, and that's what helps turn them into your dedicated volunteers who come on a weekly basis and feel really valued. Betsy?
Sure, so I wrote down a bunch of random practical things, so I'll just run through them in case any of these are helpful for you. I think the two overarching pieces are, one, are people having a great volunteer experience? Like, do they feel like they're making a difference, and is it a feasible volunteer experience? Like, can they get a break? Is it, something that they could do and not feel like, oh my gosh, well, this was a 7-hour commitment that I wasn't quite prepared for. Like, we try as much as possible to keep our stuff like short and sweet. They're an hour and a half, max 2 hours. And then some of the practical things that we are doing are, one, we are trying to kind of flip the narrative of what like a normal volunteer expectation is. So our program, we have trained volunteers who lead our breaks recovery events, and they can do that either on their own or depending on the event, we would open it up to general volunteers. Like, let's say we're harvesting a commercial orchard, we might need 20 volunteers. So we've got trained volunteers leading other volunteers. And so what we've tried to do is make what we advertise that we're looking for is volunteer leaders, instead of looking for just general volunteers who are untrained to come out to things like that and then asking them to become leaders. We've kind of just said, like, this is what we need. And if people don't want to do that, they can do a step down, like they can do less, but we're asking them to do more from the beginning. And so people think that that's the volunteer expectation, instead of feeling like, oh, like, I don't really want to do anything more. Like, this is nice and easy. I'm not really up for doing, like being asked to do more. So that's been really effective for us, and that's something that we kind of flipped during COVID. And a couple of other things, we have volunteers recommend other volunteers as potential leaders. So when they submit like a post-event report, we're asking them to keep an eye out on folks who were like super engaged, or they thought like, oh, they really got it, or hey, I've seen them at 3 or 4 harvests in a row, like I think they'd be a good leader. And then last thing, we are trying to put our volunteer leader form in as many places as possible. So that's on our volunteer calendar. So if people go on our calendar and they don't see an event that works for them, our leadership form is always there, and we have a little line under it that's like, don't see an event that works for you, like fill out a leadership interest form, and we'll contact you, and then we can kind of talk with them about like where they are and what they're interested in, and it just creates this pipeline that we don't have to work as hard for.
Betsy, I know that Food Forward also has a robust training program. Could you talk a little bit about that, what training you provide?
Sure, so our Backyard Harvest and our Farmers Market Recovery programs, those are both volunteer-led. Our wholesale program is staff-led. But for our Backyard Harvest and Farmers Market Recovery program, obviously the training is a little bit different, but we typically have folks come out to at least one event in the program that they're interested in. We make sure they actually like it. And then we run them through a series of onboarding steps. We have them fill out like a quick Google form application just to get some basic info. We have them sign an NDA, since they'll have lots of access to other volunteers' information, private information, and then an event leader agreement. We have a handbook that they get that is just like a published Google Doc that folks can go through, and then we do, it's typically between a 60 and 90-minute virtual training and then 2 on-site trainings. So like during the time that they would normally volunteer. So if they're at a farmer's market, they would just find a date that works for them, and we have volunteers train our new volunteers. So staff is doing the virtual training, but the on-site training is often done by volunteers themselves. So that's really helpful. And for both of those positions, we also require a background check because our events are open to kids. And volunteers 16 and 17 can attend without a parent or guardian. So it's possible that a minor would be like alone, potentially with one of our leaders. So that's our process. I'm happy to answer like any specific questions after, but yeah, we're still working out the kinks, but it's working as well as it can for the moment.
Thank you. I know you have hundreds of volunteers, so that process has been very effective. Thanks for sharing that. And I also know that your organization is willing to share materials with everyone else too. So don't be shy if you're looking for a handbook or anything else. Hit up Betsy or any of the wonderful Food Forward folks here today. So let's continue. Let's start with you, Barbara. What partnerships have proved to be the most valuable?
So I think I would have to say we predominantly do gleaning and harvesting. So our partnerships that are strongest is when we can exchange some of our harvested, gleaned fruit with a partner agency that does rescue. So they'll deliver 1,000 pounds of rescued potatoes, and we are not harvesting potatoes in anybody's backyard. And so we exchange that for 1,000 pounds of lemons. And it's not tit for tat, it's not pound for pound, but those types of reciprocal relationships have worked over the most years. And we did start out, just want to say, we did start out partnering with everybody and anybody, no matter how they treated us. I would not recommend that. It wears you down. So really have a good understanding and an MOU if you need it. If you've got shared resources, and that's not just funding, but if you're sharing food, those are good things to put in place so that your expectations are set out at the beginning, because we really struggle with reciprocity and strong partnerships.
Thank you for sharing that with me. Allison?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that made me think, Betsy, that is definitely one of they're sort of the in-between partners, not our food donor partners, not our recipients, but those other network partners that we are sharing food between. It's interesting what you're saying, about formalizing those, but they've definitely been beneficial for us too, as we've been sort of evolving between different size phases, as we grow and want to diversify and have different sources and diversity of crops. That's definitely been helpful. So it's awesome.
We get our boxes donated by a local box company, so go ask your local box company or email any box company and see if they'll give you free boxes or discounted boxes. We also have found farmers market managers to be fantastic partners, and one of the requirements for us to glean a market is that we can find on-site storage. And so typically if the market manager is super excited about us being able to glean the market, we'll say, that's fantastic, like, where can we store our stuff? And so that's been really great, and then they can also introduce us to like all sorts of cool vendors and farmers. Like we have them walk around with us when we're thinking about gleaning in the market, so that they can help us build trust, and they can spread the word about who we are and all of their networks as well. So those are probably the two that come to mind for me.
Yeah, thank you for that. My unofficial role is volunteer with Portland Fruit Tree Project, and I don't think there's anyone who is more comfortable asking for donations and help than Heather, their executive director. So she is the OG of asking anybody for any help, and that they get incredible things donated. They had a 600-foot charcuterie board. It was a Guinness World Records, and all of the food was donated. So all of the attendee revenue, the ticket sales, went toward their budget. So she is the queen of donations. So those partnerships are very valuable. In kind, like Barbara was saying, in kind donations, whether it's for your organization or for the people that you serve. Jemiah, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yes, I have a question for the young lady here on the left, as well as the woman in the middle. I'm sorry, I'm working.
Hang on a second, you'll get a mic.
Sure. Yes, I'm with Crop Swap LA. I think first for the young lady in the middle from Vermont.
Yes, Allison.
Allison, thank you. My question, earlier you mentioned that you wish you had asked more of your board earlier on. What specifically would you have asked them for?
I think in particular, I think in just general, sort of a higher engagement level, like asking them to participate more and asking more of them in general. But in particular at this point is having them help with creating some of the structures and systems, especially around the board itself. Having them more involved in creating some of those systems, and maybe getting some more professional consulting earlier on to understand, like, I don't know what the right expectations are, so helping them and all involved to understand sort of what the ideal would look like in terms of that.
Okay, so around like board structure, governance structure, and financial management, things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then, what's your name?
Betsy.
Betsy, thank you. At Crop Swap LA, we harvest backyard fruit, basically. And I've had to be careful with my HR department because legally, we have to be careful to not have volunteers doing the same job as a paid person, because then the volunteer could claim they did work for free and sue us. So you mentioned how kind of volunteer leaders are brought in to help lead on that level. How do you distinguish between the work they do versus the work the staff person does?
Yeah, most of what staff does is coordinating. So we'll step in to lead if a volunteer cancels last minute, or if we're leading like a big new property where it's complex, there's maybe it's like a commercial orchard. If there are too many volunteers, like we have a leader to volunteer ratio that we try to keep. And if we feel like it's beyond that, it's too much for a volunteer to do, like staff can support with that. But the vast majority of our our volunteer work is like we're coordinating, we're refilling storage, we're contacting donors, we're getting all the details, we're following up with issues, we're recruiting volunteers. So we'll fill in when needed, but it's mostly volunteers who are out there doing that work.
And do the volunteers go out without a staff person?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's something we were told not to do. So I want to talk with you and see how we can make that happen. I think we'd like to save a lot of money and figure out how you're doing it.
Cool, yeah.
Thanks.
Excellent. So let's continue with other key components here of the gleaning experience. And measurement is always one of those. So maybe Allison, we'll start with you. How do you measure success beyond pounds gleaned?
We measure a lot of things, including pounds, of course. Recently, we've been trying to create some more data that we can use and a little bit more of that outreach to volunteers and to donors, particularly, and thinking about our survey questions in particular to help with that. And so one of those that we've found to be pretty useful is asking our partners and volunteers, how would they communicate our work for us? Asking them what would they tell someone about our work and having that in our surveys. And that's been very impactful and, a great way for them to communicate our message, and having it come from them is obviously more impactful. So that's been really, I think, one of the biggest things we've been using from our surveys. And one of the others is trying to set a benchmark and create a benchmark for what, how many people in the community understand what Gleaning is and understand that word and what that means, and asking our volunteers how many of the people that they interact with in their daily life know what it is. It also helps us understand how good a job they're doing at communicating about their passion and their volunteer activity and how engaged they are. If they're really telling all their friends and family about it, we know that shows their engagement, but also, on the recipient level, it shows how much work they're doing to help spread the word as well. So we want to sort of start collecting that data now so we can see if we're moving that needle and helping communicate that. And so that's not quite as quantifiable, but trying to use our survey data to see if we can actually get some numbers.
I love that. I'm gonna use that on my board, matter of fact. How many people around you, what percentage of the people that you talk to know about Itsukishi, the refugee network? What percentage know about food recovery, food loss? So that's a great idea. One of the measurements that I have down and came to a realization during this symposium was, and I can't say that we've tracked it well over time, but we have seen the phenomenon over and over, which is refugees who are our volunteers, part of our volunteer base, as well as our major demographic that we serve. They recommend us to other family members, other families, and so that's an important testimonial to us. And the other thing about collecting data, not just pounds, but are those testimonials. I don't know how many quotes I've sent in the last 6 months to Amelia, just off my desk, just unattached to much except another quote, another testimonial. Those have power to transform people and their impression of what you do and the importance that it has. And those come from Tucson volunteers, to quotes from refugees, to quotes from board members.
And just before Betsy gets a chance to say it, just jumping off of this last presentation that we just saw, having a spreadsheet that you can put all those quotes in and you can sort them and find what you need so that you have those in a way that is really useful.
Yeah, 30 quotes. We track a bunch of stuff and we could track a bunch more stuff, but some of the helpful numbers, we're obviously tracking like unique volunteers and new volunteers, just like helps us get a sense of how many new folks are coming into our community, what our retention rate is. We track the number of events that we go to and we table at. We have like a small volunteer program where we train volunteers to go out and represent us in the community. So could be at like a college community service fair or like a city's Earth Day festival. So volunteers can go out and rep us. And tracking kind of like what our engagement is, like asking volunteers to estimate how many people came up to the table and just getting a sense of our visibility in that way. All kind of qualitative feedback. We send a little survey that's attached to our thank you email after every event that has volunteers do like a smiley face scale, like, how was your experience? Would you recommend us? And that's like, we don't use that often, but that's also just a really easy way to report back to your board and be like, 96% of people gave a green smiley when they were asked about their volunteer experience. We also track like how well our work is supporting our partner organizations. So we just started Gleaning a new market and it's pretty small, and we were kind of debating whether it was worth our time. We were kind of having a hard time recruiting folks there, and in talking to the agencies that was receiving from that market, they were basically like, we actually couldn't handle more than this market produces. Like the 3 boxes that we get is exactly the amount that we need to be able to support the community we serve. And so that's really helpful data, and it kind of counteracts the narrative of like more is better, because it's not always. And then just like an internal thing that we kind of track, but like how many times does staff have to fill in when volunteers cancel? Like it's just a good like effectiveness in, you know, like how burnt out are we feeling, or are we mostly getting stuff covered by volunteers?
I like that one. Let's go to the chat, and Lisa, if you could tee up questions from the chat.
So far, there's just one. She said, I like the farmer's market model where the org collects the boxes and the recipient picks up the market. Who does the weighing and reporting behind that?
Volunteers. So we train our volunteers to do that, and then if it's a big market, then we'll recruit like untrained general volunteers from the public, and they'll come out and they'll kind of help with that, but the lead volunteer is the one that's kind of like running the show at the market.
I got a question. I want to ask. Betsy, sorry. I'm having a hard time with names right now. Betsy, what do you guys do for insurance? Because this is a follow-up to my last question again about volunteers versus staff. We do not insure the location, like the person's home or we're running a lane, but we do insure locations where we're growing food and what is on property, like our micro farms. So when it's uninsured, that's why we have to send our staff. What do you guys do with insurance?
Yeah, I'm not an insurance expert, but we carry it and all of our volunteers are covered. And so,
General liability.
yeah, we have general liability, but we have in some cases, like if we do a specific event, we've had like that location added like to our insurance. But for the most part, like if a fruit donor wants to see it, like we have a printed copy of our insurance that we send with all volunteers, and they can give it to them. We can email it to them. Yeah, but happy to talk more like specifics offline. I can like ask if you have more specific questions.
Great. Allison or Barbara, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that, I mean, not everything we do, most of the things we're doing is at other people's properties, and our general liability is covering all those activities and those volunteers.
Okay.
Grants require us to carry the general liability, and we just went from, and it's typically been $1 million liability, and it just went up to, we were asked for $2 million, and we're able to secure that. So that covers all those activities and all those properties. But we can't, for a specific event, and if it's required by the entity, we can get a printout that we have coverage at that exact address.
There's a question in the back.
Yes, I had to step out, so if this was already asked, I would love to hear you afterwards. But especially since y'all have all been around for so long, were there any lessons or takeaways from COVID that either became part of your best practices, or if you heard of an impending crisis, you would immediately implement into your logistics again, especially for newer cleaning organizations? Like, do you have a main takeaway that, you're still here, that sort of helped you weather the storm, or that really helped your staff and volunteers stay safe?
Jumping to mind.
The only thing that like we're still using that was really helpful is, it's a long story, but volunteers are documenting all of what gets distributed, and so we're writing things down, and that used to be done in the same physical space where the food was, but we started using walkie-talkies for that, and so now we have that flexibility so we can engage different volunteers who can't be in the cold space or whatever we needed to do that during COVID, of course, but now it gives that just a little bit of flexibility. That's really a tiny thing, but it actually makes a difference. Anything else you guys can do?
Yeah, we did a lot of encouraging volunteers to bring their family and friends out, especially in harvest. So, if someone's trained to lead harvest on their own. During COVID, we weren't recruiting like big groups of volunteers, and so, we were saying like you can go out on your own or like bring your family and friends, and that I feel like has been awesome because people want to do things with other people for the most part, unless you don't, and you want to go out by yourself and not have anyone talk to you. But I think that's been really great, and we've seen a lot more, I think, of our harvest leaders who have been super psyched to like bring their company out. They work for a company, they want to bring a few of their coworkers out, they want to like, harvest with their siblings, with their partners, with their neighbors, and so that's been really fun, and I think has continued and probably will, and I think it's just a good recruitment strategy in general that we were doing before, but not, like, I don't think we were emphasizing it as much.
There's a question over here.
Hi. Do you have advice on building trust with homeowners? For a little context, I work for a small organization hoping to start backyard fruit tree cleaning in a rural area, working on a reservation where the community is very, very tight, often distrusting, but there's often conflict between community members. Where do you start to build trust so that people want you to bring maybe strangers, maybe people they know but don't like onto their
But I gotta answer the opposite of that. And we've talked about during this symposium about measuring the need and the number of cleaners, and how big the glean is compared to your volunteer force. I can tell you how not to do it is bring 25 people to a one tree in a backyard. So just really trying to be intentional about that, making sure that your point person, not somebody else that got there first, the point person is the one interacting with the homeowner, so there's trust between them. In our case, that's a lead harvester, and as well as a patient person on the phone taking those phone calls for describing the property and answering their questions, so building trust all through the process.
We do a few things. We always do a call the week of the harvest to confirm with the donor, like, hey, just, again, just reminding you, we've got a harvest set up. They're gonna be in a food forward shirt. Do you want them to, are you gonna be home? If so, we'll knock on your door. If you're not sure, we can knock on your door anyway. If not, do you want us to access through the back gate? Just making sure that we have all of those details and kind of have the lay of the land from their end. And then, kind of similar to common fruit, our CRM is very similar, and so we send regular kind of ripeness emails, how's your fruit tree doing this year? And so they're hearing from us kind of regularly if they're signed up to donate. And then, we always send an email after with, hey, of course, a receipt, but it has, a little letter from our founder and where the fruit went and how much. And we get a lot of responses from donors just being like, oh, this is awesome. It's so cool to see where this went. And I thought I had one more thing, but I can't remember.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there other questions from the room or Lisa from the chat? So Masha, Lynn Benton Community Food Share is rural, very small communities in Lynn and Benton counties that have a lot of inter-community conflict that they manage. So that would be a really good resource for you to reach out to. I can get you the contact.
Thank you.
So as we're wrapping up here, think of the last words that you would like to share with us as our OG panel. Any points of humor, last tips, and or words of encouragement that you would like to share with the rest of us. The panel is yours.
Try stuff. Like, I don't know, we just try a bunch of stuff, and some of it doesn't work, and then we try something else. So, like, we're recruiting in a lot of different ways, we're trying different sites, like, we just, like, paid for, like a Meetup membership. I don't know if anyone's used Meetup, but we paid for that for a couple of months just to see if it was worth it. It's not, but like now we know, and so, yeah, I don't know, we're just kind of constantly trying to figure out what's working and tap into new communities and go to different kinds of events. And like sometimes it's a waste of time and we don't do it again, and sometimes it's awesome and it proves to be really successful. So just like keep going for it and doing different things and like talking with different people and source ideas from your volunteers, because they also know where they're plugged into and like what kind of events that you do and things that you do that are working really well for them, and then do more of that.
I would say something that I use as an explanation for a lot of what we do is make sure that your systems and structures are running really smoothly and really well, so that you can have that flexibility to deal with the perishable and the unexpected, because you are going to have a lot of unexpected. So if you can have your structures and systems really fine-tuned and those are really set in place, then the other stuff is a lot easier to manage when those system structures are running well and smoothly and everyone's on the same page as how to make them work well. Because you're going to have, you know, lots and lots of unpredictable elements of the work that you're doing.
I would just say continue to educate and inspire, and I think most of the organizations here don't see themselves as just a food bank, and we never like to be called a food bank, because we feel and we want to generate interest that's much deeper connections with the community, with the end being community integration, socialization, and good for all of the entire community. So congratulations on all the work that you're doing, and keep it up.
Thank you, my OG panel, educate and inspire, and today you've been educational and inspirational to us all. So thank you for joining us.